UFC China, it is late here, Eastern Standard Time, but UFC China ends up being kind of a bummer for some people, but as we got up there in the upper echelons of the fights, namely the top 3 fights, the Dong Hyun Kim fight one being one of them, and that was a hard-fought fight. Excellent win for Kim, and we a shocking uh, kind of turn of events, especially pushing off the cage the way he did for Mr. Silva. And then, of course, the main event between Franklin and Lee. Now, the odds makers had they had it pretty much completely bass fucking backwards because the way I was looking at it, I was looking at it from not the odds makers' point of view, but from what I've seen from previous performances. Kung Lee being 1-1 in the UFC will go to the main event first and then go down the ladder. That's the way I want to do it because it was such a spectacular knockout. I couldn't believe that it happened in that fashion. Let me tell you why. I was present when he actually said afterward that he didn't want to be known as the man to end Chuck Liddell's career, but he did what he had to do. When it came octagon time, he did what he had to do and got went for the knockout and got it. So Rich Franklin ends up fighting Chuck Liddell because Tito Ortiz pulls out of a fight. So Rich Franklin ends up having to fight Chuck Liddell. Long story short, Chuck Liddell breaks Rich Franklin's arm in the first round. We were hoping they were going to stop it. I could see that something was wrong with Franklin's left arm. It was a kick to the arm that broke Franklin's arm. I was hoping they were going to stop it in between rounds 1 and 2 with like 4 seconds left. Basically, Liddell, the Iceman, runs into a straight right from Rich. So, again, Rich did say he doesn't want to be the guy to end the reign, or career of Chuck Liddell. He just was doing his job. I love Rich Franklin as a fighter. I really thought he had mega edges in this fight, especially in striking. Kung Lee has an unorthodox way of striking and incredible wrestling. True, but Rich Franklin's been in this game for a decade, and his preparation is second to none, like Randy Couture type preparation. I thought he'd be ready for Kung Lee, but then again, it's hard to find a sparring partner that's going to be able to emulate someone like Kung Lee. I stated previously that like Frank Shamrock fought him and was dicking around a lot and ended up losing the fight. His only loss in the UFC comes by way of Wanderlei Silva, which again is ironic because Rich Franklin is one of those guys that will meet you at catchweight, he'll fight you at middleweight, and he'll fight you at light heavyweight if need be. And they did call him on a few weeks' notice, and that was when Vitor had to pull out of the tough finale we did in Brazil. Vitor pulls out of the fight, so he fights Wandy for the first time, beats him for 3-round decision. They call Rich Franklin. He accepts the fight on Wandy's home turf, the tough finale. Everyone's there, packed stadium. He only had a few weeks to prepare, and he comes in for a 5-rounder against Wanderlei Silva for the second time. Wanderlei Silva pounded on him, and Wanderlei Silva, being nicknamed the Axe Murderer, who I think has the most, if not the most, probably second to none killer instinct in mixed martial arts. If he has you hurt, he smells blood, he goes in for the kill, he goes in for the knockout. He has a few submissions to his credit, but it's mainly the knockout that he looks for. It's just the knockout, the power of Wanderlei Silva. So he had Rich Franklin hurt. He had him wobbled. He had him. If it would have been Pride Rules 10-minute rounds, Rich Franklin would have lost the fight. He had him bruised, battered, hurt, dizzied, everything you could possibly be. Rich Franklin comes back Rocky style and beats Wanderlei Silva for a second time on home turf. Kung Lee, however, in his UFC debut, sparred with tougher guys, sparred with guys that weighed 205 and up, and he's a middleweight. He gets down to 185. Thick guy for 185. Short, but definitely thick. And he did it on purpose because he was prepping for Wanderlei Silva. Didn't do the same thing in his second fight with Patrick Cote. Edged out the decision. Wasn't really impressed with his win over Patrick Cote. I was impressed, however, with his win in China over Rich Franklin. Rich Franklin came out striking actually significant strikes. Ended up being, of course, the fight was stopped in the first round, but the significant strikes were more than double for Franklin. It was 16-7, and that's all Cung Le needed. The seventh strike was, of course, the 16th strike for Franklin was a right leg kick that landed on Kung's lead leg and planted a right hand right on the jaw, and Rich Franklin goes limp flat and just basically spins around and face plants, and a first round knockout for Cung Le. It just reminded me, wow, and I just said in my previous videos how much of, it seems like Rich Franklin's jaw held up over Father Time. Not tonight, didn't it? It looked like his jaw gave out on him. It looks like time has finally taken its toll on Rich Franklin. I don't expect to see Rich Franklin back anytime soon. I wouldn't blame him if he didn't. I mean, he said he wanted to make another run at the title. I think right now, Cung Le at age 40 years old, Cung Le is 40 years old and only getting better. So Cung Le has excellent wrestling, excellent stand-up, and he just knocked out Rich Franklin, the former kingpin of the 185-pound division. I think that's an impressive resume, especially for the UFC. Now he's 2-1. I think it only makes sense to give him a rematch against the only person to beat him in the UFC, and that would be Wanderlei Silva. I think that would be perfect for Cung Le. I think he would certainly be ready this time. I did 2 videos on this. One of them I didn't put out. One of them I did put out, and I had Franklin all day winning this fight. I had Franklin win this fight all day. The reason for it being that it was such a vet. He's such a vet. He has like Randy Couture level of game planning and second to none cardio. His wrestling is great. His Muay Thai striking is incredible. His all-around MMA game just seems more. It just seems tighter than Cung Le. However, tonight it just showed that Cung Le was the superior striker. Got there on time in the right place at the right time. Just so happened to be in the first round. And I mean, it was one punch. It was a one-punch knockout. It was a well-placed punch. But it also seems like, I talk about MMA syndromes. BJ Penn being cardio. Chuck Liddell being his chin. Wanderlei Silva being his chin. There's certain MMA syndromes that fighting. Once you're a fighter, especially a fighter of old, say you've been in this game for 7, 8, 10 years, you don't want to give it up. And when you don't want to give it up, you feel like, you can still do this. You can still push through. And it took, I forget what Chuck Liddell was. At the end of his career, his record was ugly. It was like 6 out of 7, of his fights were losses, and most of them were KO losses. It was bad. So it's hard to quit the sport. I do understand this, but I think it's Rich Franklin's time just to step back and maybe give him one more fight to go out on. But Cung Le at age 40 years old, I think it's his turn. Let's just give. I think the UFC should push him, promote him, and try to push him maybe to title fight status. Not saying right away. This fight with Patrick Cote didn't impress me. The knockout of Rich Franklin impressed me, but his reaction afterwards was he was even shocked. He was surprised that he got the best of Rich Franklin on the feet and got the knockout. He was so impressed. He even hugged the wrong corner. The first person to come into the octagon was a member of Rich Franklin's corner, and he almost hugged him. And then remembered that wasn't part of his corner, so he went to the other part of the corner and celebrated. Cung Le, 40 years old, excellent striker, generates most of his power through spins and such. But I mean, the odds makers basically had it all wrong. The Oriental people, I mean, they were basically all underdogs. Gomi versus Danzig, another fight I want to talk about, went to a 3-round split decision. It's debatable, but I think they got it right. I think it was definitely the Fireball Kid via takedowns that sealed the deal for that fight. And it shocked. There's so many decisions on the card. Thiago Silva versus Paulo Thiago. Paulo Thiago had been on a downside ever since his loss to Diego Sanchez. He lost to Diego Sanchez. Diego Sanchez is a crazy motherfucker, and I was actually live for that fight as well. And man, that was crazy. Everyone was going nuts. I think the person most going crazy was Joe Rogan. So I mean, it wasn't too much of a surprise to me to see to see that that guy get beat. What was a surprise to me is Thiago Silva pull off a submission, especially against a cage like that. The way he pulled it off, it was an arm triangle. The way you want to pull off an arm triangle is to get someone's arm across the throat and then wrap your arms around there, either palm to palm or of course like this. And the way he had it was against the cage, and he edged himself and rolled around like a clock. And it turns out that the guy's got submission. The striker's got some submission skills, and this is what you need to catch up. In this game nowadays, you need some tools. You need to have everything. You have to have everything. You can't just be a wrestler, kind of box here a little bit, and then maybe roll some jiu-jitsu and then roll into the octagon and expect to win. It's not going to work. I have what this new breed of fighting is just the John Jones of this world. I believe that Rory McDonald someday is for sure going to take the 170-pound title. Someday that guy will take the title. That kid will take the title. How young is he? And we got Michael McDonald at 135 pounds, just incredible. The Jose Aldos. I mean, these guys are world-class athletes. They're world-class athletes. They're not just kickboxers. They're not just, they're a separate breed. These guys are world-class athletes that study in every aspect of MMA. Not only that, they study in every aspect of MMA for several reasons, and that is to be the best in the world. And if you're not, striving to be the best in the world, what are you fighting for? Fighting doesn't pay much, especially in mixed martial arts. You might as well go to boxing. And in boxing, if your name's not Mayweather or Pacquiao, you're not making any money. So, I mean, it was a shocking turn of events. 5-1 underdog. A lot of people won a lot of money. A lot of bookies are, it's in their pockets as of tonight. But it was a stunning knockout by Cung Lee. A test of time for Rich Franklin. It really did remind me of UFC 115 when he knocked out Chuck Liddell. Do you think it's time for Rich Franklin to hang him up, or should he keep going? And will this be the last time we see Rich Franklin and Cung Lee? Should the UFC promote him? I did see on his shorts the UFC was one of his sponsors, so the UFC did sponsor Cung Lee for this fight. So it's another thing to think about. So what do you think? Is it time for Rich Franklin to hang him up? Is it time to promote Cung Lee? Can we give Rich Franklin one more to go out on, just as they did Tito? Or is Cung Lee just strictly too old? Is he one-dimensional? I know he has the wrestling. I know he has striking. But he really has 0 submissions to his credit. Not 1 submission to his credit. So he's now 9-2, but with no submissions. Think about this. Comment, rate, subscribe. Love you all. Please take care of each other. Follow us over one-on-one.